Hey guys, Dragon Ball for Life here today, and I'm back with another video. Now, today's video, I'm going to be having a full, complete guide on how to do a proper versus battle. Because I've watched countless other versus channels, which, like Death Battle, who would win in a fight between, two characters from different universes, or sometimes even like same universes or whatever, who would win in a fight, between that. And there's countless other channels, but there is one big problem with every channel that I see that does these type of videos or content where they're talking about who would win in a fight, and that is the fact that I feel like the rules that they set and the variables they take into consideration on who would win is very very limited, and a lot of them are not very complete. Even though Death Battle is the biggest and most well-known YouTube channels of all time that has done versus battles, even they are very bad when it comes to it. A lot of times, like, the two main problems I see with them is, one, they're very inconsistent with their analysis on who would win in a fight. They really flop over on what they take into consideration on what would make another character win. And another problem is the fact that their structure for these videos on who would win in a fight are very limited. They aren't terrible, but they're just not complete. And I've seen this with countless other YouTube channels, and this is a topic that's been in my mind for a while, and I want to talk about for quite a while. So in this video, I'm going to be doing a complete guide on how to do a perfect versus battle just like format. I'm not gonna be, saying that, oh, I'm doing one. I'm just giving you a format and a template that would be the best if you're gonna do one, if you have a channel or if any of the big channels want to take into consideration. Now, I'll try to fit it all in this video, but if I do forget, remind me in the comment section which topics or what thing I didn't touch upon. And I'll also, since I'll be rewatching this while I'm editing it, I will be also trying to think to myself if there's anything I missed, and if there is, I'll possibly make a part 2 to this video. But for right now, I want to try to get everything in. Now, let's talk about these versus battles in general. Now, usually the common thing that I see with people that do these versus battles is they only take 3 things usually into consideration, and there's only 3 things that are across the board that every YouTube channel that makes this content takes into consideration, and that's speed, strength, and durability. So whenever they say who would win in a fight, they usually look through who's faster, who's stronger, and who's more durable to see who would win in a fight. But there's a lot more to it than just that, and it's a lot more complex. And even those 3 things in alone have more complexities to it than a lot of people think they do. So in this video, I'm going to be going through quite a bit of stuff. Now, the first thing, let's talk about speed. How do we do speed and a versus battle, like a combat situation? Now, there's quite a bit of discourse when it comes to fans and people in the versus community, and usually the biggest argument is the argument between travel speed versus combat speed, which I've even made a video on my channel early on, which you guys should go check it out. But I feel like there's more I should add on to it. Not that my last video was bad or I disagree with it, it's just that I feel like there's more to be added, and I'm going to try to do in this video. I'm not going to go too in-depth since I already did quite a bit of an in-depth video before. You guys can go check that out. But yeah, I think there's more to it than just that. And after watching Surfbone's video on it, though I disagreed with him, I do appreciate his channel, what he has, but I disagreed with him, and I still stick with what I believe. But I do admit that there's some stuff that he mentioned in that I forgot to mention in my video. And one thing that I didn't even take into consideration, and that was reaction speed. So he added reaction speed to it, so I agree, yes, there are more than 2. There's combat speed, travel speed, and reaction speed. Usually combat speed and travel speed are, they're kind of an argument between those two. Not reaction speed, travel speed and combat speed, I think I said. Usually travel speed and combat speed have, kind of an argument between those two, but reaction speed really doesn't, it doesn't really mess anything up. But let's go into it. First, let's talk about reaction speed. Now, reaction speed it's actually 2 things. One is how fast can you perceive something moving, and 2, how fast can your brain process that information to your body so it can act upon it. Now, this will directly correlate to either travel speed or combat speed, but I would put it more at combat speed. But I'll explain more about combat speed versus travel speed a little bit more, not too much because I did already make a video on that. So like I said, if you guys want to get more in-depth analysis on that, you should check it out on my channel. But reaction speed, it's really important because first the first part is the sight part, is seeing the thing moving. Now this could be like some characters moving so incredibly fast and you're able to track, like, in the fight and stuff. And the best example of this is, what we saw with in Dragon Ball, with Gohan trying to look for every, like, it was Yamcha versus the Cybermen, and he was like, "Where are they? How come you guys can see it?" And Piccolo mentioned to him, like, "Hey, if you focus, you will be able to see it." So once when he was able to focus and think about it, he was able to perceive the fight a lot better. So that was him. He already had the reaction speed to see it, but he just needed the focus to fixate on that. But yeah, sight is seeing is the first thing, and then your brain processing that information in a certain amount of time. And those two things, though they're directly linked, they do have some stuff that are not completely exactly the same. For example, you can see something moving fast, but you won't be able to process, your brain won't be able to process fully what it was. You just see it moving fast. If it moves fast, you can still see it, but you only see it zoom past you. Or like with Gohan, when he saw them fighting, he was able to see the entire fight. It was just minor glimpses here and there because of the speed that he was seeing. So yeah, even if a character can see somebody moving fast, that doesn't mean that they can fully see it or truly realize what they're seeing, because their brain can't process that. So those two things, there's going to be a bit of a delay there. But usually there's not too big of a problem there. Now, combat speed and travel speed, these are where the big problem usually happens with this debate, because those two things are significantly different, combat speed and travel speed. Now, the argument that some people make, one side says that travel speed and combat speed are the same thing. You don't really need to do combat speed. All you need is travel speed. And the other side saying that travel speed doesn't really mean anything in a fight. Combat speed is the only thing that matters. Now, you already know how I feel about it, since you possibly already checked the the original video. But if not, I'll just restate what my opinion is. I do believe that combat speed is different than travel speed, and I do think that combat speed is more important than travel speed. Now, you can use travel speed to a certain extent, but I think combat speed is the best way to go if you want to convey who would win in this fight, because it's not a foot race, it's not a race to fight or whatever. It's not to see who would win by going from one place to another. It's about who is the faster one when it comes to the fight, when it comes to throwing hands. And there's a little bit more nuance to it than just, if you can move this fast, then you should be able to fight this fast. It's not that it's not that simple. But there's even more to it than just that. So now, travel speed is basically, the way it's explained is moving from point A to point B in a certain amount of time. So it's like time divided by distance or whatever to see the speed. Whereas combat speed, it's far more complex. It's basically how fast are you in a fight, like throwing punches or kicks or whatever. So it's a little more complex than that, and I'll get onto that. But let's talk a little bit about travel speed. Travel speed is basically simple. It's just of, let's say you want to find some information on how fast a character can move. Just see one where they went an incredible distance, and how much time did it take for them to go that distance, and then you just have to do some simple math, and you can find their speed, putting it in either meters per second or miles per hour or kilometers per hour, whichever one you want. But you can find it through that. That's very simple. But there's a little bit more to it than that also, like the fact that travel speed can depend on like flying or running, because some characters can do both. Like Superman, he can run at high speeds and fly at high speeds. But there's the thing you need to take into consideration is that even Superman has stated that he moves faster when he flies than when he runs. So you can't even equate those two as the same, even in that category. You can't say, well, this character can run at this speed, so that means that they can fly that speed, or they can fly that speed, so they can run in this speed. That isn't the case. Usually, and specifically if it's stated, most characters, when they fly, they move faster than when they run. And especially in Superman's case, Superman has admitted that he is slower when he's running. He admitted this when he was racing against the Flash. He said, every time I race against you, I was running, and I'm slower when I run. So yeah, that's good to take into consideration, that certain characters that can fly, it's more likely that they're going to be faster when they're flying than when they're running. So take that into consideration. Also, another thing about travel speed, let's talk about characters who have energy, attacks. If a character fires an energy attack like laser beams or the Kamehameha, it's that attack is going in a linear path. So travel speed would be perfectly fine for that. But that's perfectly fine for it. But I don't think it's fine for like physical attacks. But yeah. there's that for the travel speed, and then the combat speed is far more complex. And like I said, I don't want to go too in depth with this, but I'll give you a little bit of analysis on what combat speed is. Combat speed would consist of countless things. One, how fast can the character strike? Two, how fast can the character block an attack either from close range or far range, and how fast can a character dodge an attack from either close range or far range. And the reason why I say close range or far range, it really depends, because like close range, usually people are dodging physical attacks at close range, and the attacks that they're dodging at long range are energy attacks, like energy beams and stuff that characters fire from like a distance. So you need to have that too. So that makes it a little more complex, because it's not talking about just see them going from a certain distance and a certain amount of time and you get the math. It's far more complex. You can't really easily calculate how fast the character can punch unless they say they punch this many times in this amount of time, So that's where you get it. But like I said, there's multiple things to it. It's how fast can you punch, or I mean, how fast can you hit, how fast can you block, how fast can you dodge. Those things are very important. And also, I guess you could say how fast you can counter. It's kind of like attacking, but counters are defensive and offensive move. It's defensively blocking or dodging, and striking right afterwards. So that's where it becomes a little more complex, and you can see the difference there. Now a lot of people say, well, if you can run super fast or run really fast or move fast, then you should be able to strike at that speed too, because your limbs are moving individually at that at those speeds. But that's not how it works. If you know anything about combat sports or fighting, you would know just because a person can run really fast doesn't mean that they can strike really fast. And even Batman explained this very well when Superman was arguing with Wonder Woman. He stated that they were talking about who would win in a fight, and Wonder Woman said, I'm faster. She's like, I'll beat you in a fight. And Superman's like, but I'm faster than you. And she's like, yeah, well, I have faster reflexes than you. So Superman's like, so what does that even mean? He's like, what does that matter if I'm faster than you? And Batman explained to him, is like, okay, compare Bruce Lee to Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt is the faster of the two, but Bruce Lee can throw, he can kick and punch faster than him, right? And he's like, okay, I get it. So basically what he's saying is, it doesn't matter how fast you can move, that doesn't mean you can strike really fast. Because if that was the case, then track stars, who are the fastest people on the planet, should be the fastest strikers, but they're not. Martial artists are, and martial artists, you don't need to be super fast. Now, cardio is part of their training a lot, but they're not training to run really fast or win races. They're training for cardio. They're training to, run and build up endurance and stuff that, trains also their stamina. So there's that to take into consideration, and when you look at that, you can realize that travel speed and combat speed are significantly different. And even if you want to argue that they're the same, there's no difference, then if, let's say, just for argumentative sake, instead of just arguing about or showing feats of how fast this character move from one place to another, why don't you just show feats of how fast this character can fight? Because if somebody's disagreeing and saying, no, I don't believe that, then show them that, okay? So you can, eliminate any arguments that they can have. But the fact that they keep on fixating on just travel, showing feats of travel speed and on combat speed showcases to us or other people that, yeah, you don't even believe that, and you're using this as an excuse. But yeah, travel speed or just speed in general is very, very confusing. There's a little bit more nuance to it than just also that. Like even combat speed, like I said, reactions is linked directly to combat. Like for example, if you see something, the way a fight works is your eyes first see it, then it goes to your brain processes that information, then it sends signals to your body to react to it. Now, a higher level or more skilled fighter can do this to the point where they train so much that their body naturally reacts. Now, there will always be some connection between the brain and the body's response, but you won't need to even be fully conscious for your body to react or move. We've seen it in fighters where they've been knocked out and they're still able to move and hit somebody or do something because it's been trained in their body. So that's also something you need to take in consideration. Also, reaction like speed or processing information can be also a little bit tricky depending on of an ability they have. For example, the Uchihas have the Sharingan, which allows them to see, techniques and copy it. But this lets them have a higher sense of perception, so they can see things moving a lot faster. But that doesn't mean they can move at that speed. For example, Sasuke, when he was fighting against, I think his name was Haruko or whatever in the Zabuza arc, the guy was moving through the ice, and even though he could actually see him, he could not react to his attacks because he was moving so fast that his body wouldn't be able to react to it. His eyesight has enhanced, perception where it can see things moving faster than even his body can react. So there's sometimes delay there, but usually there shouldn't be unless there's some ability that would, make it a problem or whatever. But what's the thing called? Yeah, so normally they're closely linked, but if a character has an ability where they have better eyesight, that can also play in there. So just because a character can see something moving fast or even perceive it, like let's say they can process the information and know what's happening, that doesn't mean their body's fast enough to do anything about it. If an attack is coming at them and they know it is, that doesn't mean that their body's fast enough to still move out of the way. That doesn't 100% always correlate. So there's that. But travel speed, some people might say, well, is there any importance to it in a fight? Yes, there definitely is. You can use it. Like, let's say some character knocks a character instead of flying, and then they dash over to catch them and, beat them up more. That can also work. Or they do an attack where they charge in at somebody. So that would be travel speed. So it can work. But usually in a fight scenario, combat is more, speed is more important when it comes to combat than when it comes to travel. So it's different. Also, there's another thing that I want to mention. Two completely big things that I want to mention. One is another thing you need to take into consideration when it comes to combat speed is a character's stamina. Now, this is a separate category I'll talk about later, but stamina is important because as the fight progresses and the more energy you use up, the more tired you become. And the more tired you become, and especially if you become even damaged with it, the slower you will become and the weaker you will become. So if a character might be able to move super fast and fight really fast, it also depends on their stamina. Because if they have great stamina, they can move at those speeds for a long time. But if they have terrible stamina, they will be very limited with how much time they can use that speed. So you can have a character who moves 100 times faster than his opponent, but the fact that their stamina is so low that even with that 100 times speed boost, that they lose energy to the point where now they're too slow. So it also matters about that. So it's like you can use like, oh well, this character can throw this many shots in this short amount of time. Well, how many shots can they throw if they're depleted of energy, because their attacks are going to be a lot slower. And this happens in real life and in fiction. We've seen characters where they lost stamina and or got severely damaged and they got physically weaker and their attacks got slower and stuff. So yeah, you will get slower. And then another thing is, even with travel speed or just speed in general, one thing people need to take in consideration is there's two types of speed when it comes to that. There is burst speed and acceleration speed. Now, burst speed is basically like when you first move, like let's say you fly or run, you get an initial high sense of burst of speed instantly, and then as soon as it happens afterwards, it starts to decelerate until it hits your natural level of speed, and then it stays in that natural level of speed a certain amount of time until it peaks out and your energy is kind of getting lower. Then it starts to decelerate and the character gets slower. Like for example, Dragon Ball. The Dragon Ball characters, their initial speed when they move is insanely fast. You see the energy blowing out of their body or around them when their aura is around there, and they fly around really fast or loop around really fast. But as soon as afterwards they do that, they start to move slower and they move at just a consistent speed that they normally go at. And if they do it for too long, they get slower and slower and then they lose too much energy. We saw this with Goku when he was on Snake Way. He used up too much of his energy and lost so much to the point where he couldn't even fly anymore and he had to run, which he is slower when he runs. Also, and then there's the acceleration speed. So the acceleration speed is more akin to comic book characters like Superman and the Flash, where their initial speed might not be fast. Their actually initial speed is when they're at their slowest. Maybe not towards the end, at least at first, because towards the end they could be way slower. But they start off slow, but as time passes and the more they're able to move and gain more momentum, they accelerate more and more and more and more until they get faster and faster and faster and faster. Then they reach their peak. And then after that, they hit like a consistent level, and then they start to decelerate the same way because everybody gets tired unless the character has infinite, energy or whatever. So Superman and Flash usually have this. They don't start off super fast. They might start off faster than obviously most beings, but they will still need to accelerate, and the more they accelerate, the faster they become. Have you seen any Flash comic books? You would know that Flash, that's how his speed always works. He doesn't right off the jump move super fast. He does move quite fast, but he takes some time, and the more time he takes, the faster and faster he becomes. Superman stated, I think in the Silver Age comic book, that for him to go faster than the speed of light, it takes him at least 1 to 3 seconds for his body to accelerate to move at those speeds. So it does take some time, but you can take into consideration that too. If it's a short amount of time, it shouldn't be too big of a problem. If it's like more or longer length, that could be more of a problem. But that's how they basically go. Now, which one is better for combat? I'll say burst speed is, because travel speed is more akin to and more perfect for when it comes to a race, because it's fine if you go slow in the beginning, but if you get faster and faster and faster, your opponent will just stay at one speed and then you start to pass them. And then if you reach the peak, by that time they will just get slower or whatever. But when it comes to burst speed, it's good for short distance, and that's what's needed for a combat. Like if you're moving around a battlefield, like from one point to another, and usually these characters move from long distance, but they have that speed to do so anyway. But with, like combat speed, you need burst speed. So because you need a short burst to come in and like dodge and move out of the way and hit around, whereas acceleration can be kind of a problem when it comes to fighting, especially if you have to go a linear path to run, which you can't really do that in a fight unless you're running side by side and punching. So there's that for the speed. I know I went into that one quite in depth a little more than I should have, but like I said, these videos is going to be kind of long. I think I should probably separate these into a couple of parts. I will film this out completely, but I'll chop it up into a couple of parts. And I'll have my whole complete list in the future where I connect it all. But yeah, that's the speed category. Now let's get into the strength category. Now, one thing I want you guys to understand is strength, all these other categories are going to somewhat intertwine within each other. So even though I'm putting speed in a different thing, I will mention, I already mentioned stamina, but I'll give it a separate category. Same thing with strength, because I think that strength and durability both have somewhat of a correlation, and I'll get to explaining why that is. Now, for strength, there's two things. Once again, there's a big debate on, how do you, analyze or say who would win in a fight when it comes to strength, and that argument is usually between lifting strength and striking strength is what I usually call it. Now, lifting strength is how much a character can lift or throw, and striking strength is how much how hard can a character hit, like punch, kick, elbow, how hard can they hit, and these two things are also different. Now, the big problem that a lot of these versus channels do is they make it sound like lifting strength and combat or striking strength are the same thing, and they're not. And I've also once again made a video about that in the past, which is more in depth. In this one, I'm just going to go in a little bit more simple detail. Now, the reason why I think they're different and why I believe that striking strength is what's more important than, lifting strength is because lifting doesn't really do much for you in a fight, even in real life. If you look in real life scenarios or ask professionals like boxers or kickboxers or Muay Thai fighters or UFC fighters, they'll tell you that lifting strength and building a muscle can help out, but it's not going to give you the definitive win or more damage power. There are characters. So if you look at boxing, most boxers are not super brawlic or lift that much or lift that heavy. The heaviest lifters are powerlifters, strongmen, and bodybuilders, but they would not be that great in combat sport, not only due to the stamina problem or the speed problem, but also the strength department, because they might be able to grapple really strong, but they won't be able to hit really hard. And that's one thing I also want to talk about is grappling and striking, because that's also important. Usually when people do these videos, they look at it a simplistic way, but if you look at like UFC or MMA, any form of MMA, promotion, it's not just striking, it has grappling in it, and it's very important. Obviously, when it comes to fictional characters, depending on what abilities they have, grappling might not be that effective against a character who has the ability to, explode their body or whatever. That's not really going to help out. But yeah, let's get into that. Now, lifting strength, people think that, well, if a character or somebody can lift a certain amount or throw a certain amount, that means that they can hit that level. No, they can't. You will have a fraction of that, but even then, it's not that consistent. Just because you can bench a certain amount of weight does not mean you can, hit with that amount of weight or close to that amount of weight. And I'll explain to you why. Now, when you lift weights, you're using different individual parts of your body that are working separately and sometimes together. And usually it's upper body and lower body that do this. Like if you're working on your thigh muscle, it might work on your calf a little, but not always necessarily. And if you're working on your chest, usually your triceps and your delts are what usually connect together. But you can do separate workouts that work on one specific part of your muscles. So depending on what workout you do, you can work on different parts of your body. But when it comes to fighting, like if you're throwing a punch, you're using all your muscles in once. When you're pushing down on the ground, that force gets sent, travels back to your legs, goes through your legs, goes to your thigh muscle, goes into your hips, you twist around, generated, goes through your back muscle, goes into your arm, your forearm, and then generates through your fist, hitting that person. And you can usually hit harder if you weigh more and are able to use the momentum of your body in a swing when you're twisting your hips. So you can generate more power like that. And the physical dynamics that it takes to lift weights compared to combat are different. What you do to lift weights, the motions your body moves at and the muscles that it works are different than what it takes, when you're fighting or throwing kicks and stuff. And it's quite different. And I'll give you an example, personal example for myself in general. But yeah, those two things are not that the same. So when I hear characters saying this guy bench press this, but that works on your chest and your tricep, what does that have to do with anything? That doesn't make any sense. It's just nonsensical. And usually the people that make this argument saying this the same are people that don't know anything about actual combat and are very limited, which is fine. But like, let's be honest, if you don't know anything then about that, then it's kind of hard to use that in an argument on who would win in a fight, even though they're fictional, like superpowered characters. But yeah, that's the difference by that. And then striking strength, here's the difference about it. Depending on first two things. One, depending on your technique of you using a different technique or a different, I guess you can say form of punching or hitting, you can generate different amounts of power. And depending on what part of your body you're hitting with, you can also generate different amount of power. And I'm going to get into this a little bit more, but I'm going to have to do a little bit of a more martial arts analysis for this one. So what does it take? This is what I mean. For one, when you're throwing a strike or whatever, you need to have proper form and proper technique. If you do not, you will not be able to generate the good enough amount of power. But even if you do, let's say you do have, you can generate a lot of power without proper technique, because there's a lot of people that can do it. Proper technique can also help out with other stuff instead of just strength, but usually that is the main thing that it focuses on, is to help you generate the most amount of power if you do a proper technique. So even and this is why it's important, because we have, like, let's say two characters fighting. One character who knows how to do martial arts and the other character doesn't. Just because the other character is stronger doesn't mean that they will beat them in a fight or have harder striking attacks. If those attacks that they're doing are let's just say of they don't have any proper training, they're not going to be hitting with as much power as they should compared to somebody who does have perfect training or proper form. So that would also matter. Also, it depends on the technique that you're using. What type of technique is the person using? Now, if you're using a jab, a cross, a hook, or an uppercut, all those punches generate different levels and amounts of power. If you do a jab, you're going to have far less power than if you're doing a hook or an uppercut. A hook is considered to, overhand right is considered to be having the most amount of power. Then I think hook, these usually can interchange depending on what they think about it, but usually an overhand right is considered to be one of the most powerful punches, then a hook, then an uppercut, and then straight cross, and then the weakest is a jab. Jabs are not meant for power, they're more meant for gauging the distance, or getting points in combat sports, or trying to confuse somebody or hitting them back or set up for a future attack, to set up for a combination. But yeah, different punches generate different amount of power. So if you see a character knocking somebody out with a punch and stuff, it depends on what punch they did. If they did a jab, that's far more impressive than a character doing it with an overhand right, because they're using a technique that requires more, momentum to put more weight and more power into it. So if a character, let's say, knocked out a certain character with a simple jab, but another character did the same thing, but he had to do with the hook, he would be using a technique that generates more power to knock that person out. So the guy who did it with a jab, they both, even though their feats may be the same, the way they did it is different, and it showcases how much more powerful each of them is. So if the guy did it with the hook and the other guy did it with the jab, the guy that did it with the jab, even though they did the same thing, the guy with the jab would be considered stronger, because if you're knocking somebody out with one shot with the jab compared to a hook, like a hook, it's, you expect somebody to knock them out, but a jab, to knock them out with a single jab, that's, you have to have insane levels of power. So even if we see a character, showcasing a high level of strength, if they did it with a technique that normally requires, generates higher amount of power, then it's less impressive compared to a character who uses a technique that generates less amount of power and could do something either exactly the same or just a little bit less. That is what you have to take into consideration. Also, you have to take into a big consideration, which I don't know why a lot of people don't mention, is it depends on what body part they're using. So like if a character is beating somebody up or damaging them, it depends on, are they punching them? Are they elbowing them? Are they kneeing them? Are they kicking them? Are they headbutting them? Now, punches hurt, but a kick hurts way more. Knees hurt a lot. Elbows hurt, but the thing especially about elbows is, since usually your elbows are sharper, they also have an additional advantage where you can cut an opponent, you can cut them under the eyebrow or cause swelling. Whereas a punch, you can do that, but with your elbow it's far easier, and it can create more damage. So it also depends on what body they're attacking with. If a character knocks somebody out with a kick compared to a punch, that is different, because a kick you can generate more power with than a punch. So if a character is able to knock out an opponent, even if the opponent's a little bit weaker than the other one, and he did with a punch compared to the other guy knocking him out with a kick, then the person who punched them and knocked them out will be more powerful, because they hit with a weaker part of their body. If they were to kick, they would generate even more power than the other person that knocked out the person that was a little bit stronger. So that's also something to take into consideration. There's also another thing to take into consideration when it comes to it, and this also directly, once again, links to stamina. So but before I get into that, I do want to talk about why durability would matter. Now, this matters because, let's say, the best way to showcase how hard somebody can hit, because some people might be like, well, lift and strength, you just have to equate how much weight they're lifting and, how, over the throwing is like how much weight they were lifting and throwing, or just lifting. So you could just do that. But striking is not that hard either. It could be like, let's say they destroyed an object of massive size. Like with a single punch, they're able to destroy a city. How much power would it take to destroy a city? That would be equivalent to how hard they can hit. Or if they can damage an opponent that is able to take a high level amount of damage, that is also important. That's why I think durability is important in this. Because let's do, for an argument's sake, Goku versus Frieza. Goku was able to hurt Frieza with his punches, with his physical attacks. Now, for Goku to be able to hurt Frieza with his physical attacks, that would mean that his attacks would have to be proportional to above planet level or close to that. And the reason why I say that is because we saw Frieza survive a planet level explosion while he was even more severely damaged. He was able to survive it, showing that his durability is way beyond planet level, right? But he was getting hurt by Goku's punches. So for Goku to hurt him with his attacks would either have to be equivalent to that level of damage, or a little bit lower than that, because he's not one-shotting him. So if a character can tank a planet exploding, but they're getting hurt by another character's punch, then that character's punch would be close enough, or completely equivalent to that planet exploding level of power. So that's something you need to take into consideration. So if you're doing it if you want to see how hard they can hit, the best thing to do is use a character and showcase an example of their insane level of durability, where they're you say they survived this, but they were able to get hurt by their physical attacks, meaning that their physical attacks would be that level. So let's say they're against a character, they've never destroyed a planet, but they fought against a character who tanked a planet getting destroyed, and they were able to annihilate him with one punch. Even though we didn't see them ever destroying a planet with a single punch, the fact that they were able to destroy an opponent who tanked a planet exploding with a single punch, that would mean that they should theoretically and logically be able to generate that much amount of power too if they took them out. So that's one thing to take into consideration when it comes to that. But another thing is stamina. And just like with speed, if you start to lose stamina or you get damaged, you're going to be slower, but also you're going to be weaker. So let's say I'm throwing punches for 5 minutes straight. from the beginning when I start throwing punches towards the end of it, my power will fluctuate. Also, depending on how much you were able to, of a contact you were able to get on the opponent, especially if the opponent was blocking, that will reduce the amount of damage that you're able to dish out with your attacks. And that's also important to take into consideration when it comes to durability, when it comes to like, blocking and stuff. But you see sometimes characters, they don't knock the character out, but that's because that character moves so fast that they were able to, just only get grazed by the attack. Now, that could also be working well for strength, because we've seen characters where the character might have either blocked or dodged, and they were only grazed or touched barely by their hit, but that hit was still able to hurt them significantly, showcasing that their strength is so insane that even barely getting touched by it or blocking most of it will still severely damage you. That means that their strength is way past what your durability can even handle, even with those those advantages when it comes to that. But yeah, that's important. But also, especially when you go throughout an entire fight, the more you punch and the more energy you use, the weaker your attacks are. And I have dealt with this. Also, I forgot to mention in the speed one, no, I didn't forget to mention the speed one. But yeah, this is different. And this is what I mean by lifting strength and combat strength are two different things. And in my personal opinion, my personal life, what I've dealt with, I've gone to the gym quite a bit. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not that great of a lifter. I'm very weak when it comes to lifting. I struggle to lift heavy weights when it comes to any part of my body, when it comes to, chest, arms, and stuff, except for legs. But depending on different parts of my bodies, some parts of my body are stronger, other parts of my body are weaker. Like my chest is my weakest part of my body. The rest of my body parts, some parts are weaker and some parts are stronger, okay? But in totalness, I can't lift that much, but when I do, boxing and I hit the, punching bag, I can generate a decent amount of power, far more power than I'm able to lift weight. So when I'm lifting weight, I'm struggling and I'm pretty weak. But when it comes to, punching or striking, I'm actually decently strong. And this is not me to flex. This is, me giving you an example of a real life scenario where I struggle with lifting, but I don't struggle with striking. I can hit with a hard amount of power when it comes to striking. So striking and lifting strength, it doesn't ever really equate. You can have a bodybuilder going there, even if you see some power form, they're not going to hit as hard as a boxer because they're not working their muscles out specifically or conditioning their bodies like how a boxer would. It is a little more science to it and a depth that's a little more complex than what I can explain to you. But yeah, that's just a scenario for them. But like once again, going back to the stamina thing, if you are throwing punches throughout like for 5 minutes, your punches are going to get weaker. So let's say you record you throwing one punch at a punching bag, you're going to generate a significant amount of power. But if you were punching for, like, let's say you threw 100 punches and you had to throw your final 100th punch and clock that in, the amount of power you'll be able to generate after you punched it the 100th time will be less than when you first punched it. When you first punched it, you had full energy. Towards the 100th one, you are so depleted that you're hitting softly. This is something I've also dealt with when I've been, boxing. When I start off, I'm hitting the bag and it's making a lot of sounds. Towards the end, I can't go on and I'm just barely tapping it. Sometimes my energy might come in, but for the most part, majority of my attacks become significantly weaker and I can feel it. So that's also something you should take into consideration. Just because a character can one-shot something or has insane level of, striking power, also take into consideration the fact that, they might have that in the beginning, but how long can that last? How long can they generate that much amount of power? Because the more they fight and the more attacks they throw, the weaker their attacks are going to be. So you need to also take that into consideration. Even if they can beat up the character in the beginning, if their energy is getting depleted, their attacks are going to get weaker towards the ending. So if the character can, hold off or do some trick to hold them off or waste their energy, or smart enough to deplete their energy, then their attacks are not going to do significantly enough damage to hurt them. So that's something you should take into consideration. Sorry for that noise. My neighbors are working on cars or whatever. But yeah, that is something to take into consideration. So let's look at everything that is necessary when it comes to strength. When it comes to strength, you need to take into consideration, you need to take into consideration of, of the character has proper technique, because if they have proper technique, they should be able to generate more power. What technique were they use? What technical attack were they using when they were fighting. Like for punches, were they, you know, how much power did they generate when they did a jab compared to a hook. And I guess if you want to be completely in-depth with analysis, you can make you know, an analysis on how much power they can generate with each attack, like a jab, a cross, a hook, an uppercut, or what's the thing called, an overhand right, how much power they're able to generate with each attack. But I don't think you really need to do that. The only thing you need to do is take into consideration that all these different techniques, depending on which one they use, will generate different amount of power. And if they're using one that's more harder, then it's less impressive against a character who's used a weaker one, but you know, was able to do a sizable amount of damage. And then the other thing, going back onto, yeah, it depends on proper form, proper technique, or what technique they're using, and what body part they're using. Because depending on what body part they're using, they can generate different amount of power. If the character uses punches, they will generate different amount of power compared to if they were to kick. And this is important because a lot of you know, fictional characters might not be very good in combat, so their punches will not be you know, they would most likely rely on punches than kicks. So if you're a character, you have a character that punches, whereas the other character kicks, even though their punches are weaker than the other character, they can compensate for that by, you know, using kicks or elbows or knees or, you know, headbutts. Because depending on different parts of your body, you could generate more power. So even if a character is, you know, has higher, you know, can punch harder than the other character, if that character can only punch and the other character can kick, he can, you know, hit even, like let's say, like you still need to take some math into consideration, but they will be able to generate more power than that because of that. Also, like I said, the final thing to take into consideration is how long can they preserve that amount of damage. So those are the three main things that you need to take into consideration: is proper form, because that will generate more power, what type of technique they're using, because depending on what technique they're using, they will generate more power with their punches and stuff, and what part of their body they're using. You know, I have four things, not three things. What type of, you know, power, where, like, what part of their body were they using, because each different parts of your body will generate different amount of power, and how long are they able to, you know, hit with that amount of power throughout a fight. So those are the four things you need to take in consideration when it comes to striking. Those are basically the two analysis on strength and speed. I'm going to end it off here. Like I said, it seems like it's quite long. I was planning on doing it all in one video, but it seems a little long, so I'm going to separate these into multiple videos, and towards the end when I upload them all, I will combine them all into one. So it will just have one mega one. So you can either watch them all individually, separately, or all one together. But yeah, today we focused on more of an in-depth analysis on speed and strength. Tomorrow we're going to be doing on durability, and then you know, additional stuff that I'll put into it, and other stuff that you need to take into consideration. So yeah, thanks for listening to this video. The part 2 will be out. I don't know when I'll drop out part 2, but I'll be filming it right after I'm done with this one. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and stay tuned for next time.